Jamaica has been rocked yet again by the gruesome killing of another 8-year-old child. What has become of the village is the question that we have to ask. And to discuss that, we have government senator and clinical psychiatrist, Dr. Longmore. Welcome to the conversation. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you, Kwame. Thank you for having me.
I'm not even sure what are the right set of words to use to describe what has happened and the implications of that event. And so I'm hoping that you'd be able to shed some light on the issue. Firstly, I'd like to ask, what could possibly cause an adult to even consider doing something like that to a child?
Well, firstly, I think the first word that pops in mind is trauma. I think everywhere you look at this, trauma is the word that resonates, including in the mind of whoever it is that could possibly fathom to do this. It is hard enough for me to even try to think about the circumstance, much less try to unwind who or why an adult would go to a school, a place of safety for our children, and invade it to this extent, and then commit such a horrible act. It's the mind of a very sick individual.
So I'm thinking though that based on the fact that this is a school, one, this is someone who was known most likely to the child and someone from the school might have been able to see, because I don't think it's every day that anyone can just show up at a school and just take a child, unless it's a case whereby...
For obvious reasons, and I remember I hold various capacities, I can't speak and I won't speak to the details of the actual circumstance of what happened. I don't know, so I don't want to take any guesses, and I firmly hope that we get the person or the persons responsible. And so I wouldn't want to put anything out there that would thwart that possibility. But needless to say that the safe space that a school is supposed to be, the sense of protection, the sense of purpose of that space has been invaded, not just for the children at Brayton Primary, but I think for almost any child who hears of this circumstance, of this incident. I was doing another interview and one of my own children overheard it. And Kwame, I immediately had to remove myself from his space because I could see the sheer shock. And when I finished the interview, the first thing he said to me was, "Mommy, are we safe here?" Like, this is my child in a very safe space. And that's literally what he asked me. And immediately I had to go into a reassuring. He didn't hear any details. It was just the mention of something like this happening to a child. And it wasn't an extended conversation. But he immediately started to question his own safety. And I had to explain as best as I could, not the details of the circumstance, but reassure him of his own sense of well-being. So you can just imagine what might be obtaining out there for some children.
Well, you said something earlier about trauma, and what comes to mind immediately is the idea that hurting people hurt people. No,
hurt people are angry people, and angry people hurt people.
Now, is it that we're not doing enough to address this issue? Because trauma, we are not sure what would have or what could have caused the trauma in this individual, but we have seen this is not an isolated event. No. It's not the first. So it might be a greater issue that's there that we need to look at, that we have not been paying much attention to.
Well, the truth of the matter is that Jamaica has a history of, unfortunately, it's almost become our cultural, a part of our cultural identity. Poor conflict resolution, poor communication. Sometimes even when Jamaicans are trying to say something nice, it comes off aggressively. And because of that, it is almost, you have a generational reflection of poor mental health strategies and poor mental wellness. And that has passed on. And I think what we're seeing now, culminating with COVID and coming out of COVID, us in the field of psychiatry, we kind of sensed and knew when we saw the levels of isolation, the levels of increases in substance use, the levels of increases in domestic violence and child abuse reports, we recognized that this was going to be a period of great mental unrest and ill health manifesting. So you don't know what could have triggered this individual, this actual incident, but unfortunately for us, it is not too shocking. I mean, it is very hard for me to say that, but that's the truth. Because we have seen the signs, we saw the setup for it. You know, like when rain going fall, you see the setup. We see the setup, and we have been trying to raise awareness, get the advocacy out there, get the personnel out there in the communities, especially, who are able not just to treat the madman and so forth that everybody associate with mental illness on the streets, but mental health is about coping with stress, putting in the measures that ensures that when life comes at you with the unexpected, you're prepared to deal with it. Teaching you how to deal with disagreement, teaching how to deal with the stresses that are affecting you, and also picking up on these issues early so that you can put the interventions in like any other health situation. And the sad truth is that we are woefully under-resourced in mental health management. And because it is mental health, a lot of people trivialize it until it hits in this way.
So what more can we do? Because I'm not even sure if we should be guilty or feel guilty, because truth is we're not as angry as we probably should have been as it relates to what has happened.
Speak for yourself.
No, because we sometimes it would appear as if we're not doing enough. We're saying a lot of things, but we're not doing enough. What more, from your view, both as a government senator as well as a psychiatrist, a practicing psychiatrist, are we doing enough though?
Well, the truth of the matter is the issues have been permeating for quite a while. So I'm not going to say that, okay, all of a sudden now, you know, all solutions should be there and, you know, it is the causation of this is not a long-term situation. For me, there is great need. I was concerned about this, and I tell the truth that I was concerned about when I started to see the spate of school shootings in the US. And there was a very horrific incident in Brazil where there was a crazed attack at I think it was a kindergarten or a preschool or something like that, where somebody went literally, I think killed probably about 4 children with a knife or a machete or something like that. It came to me that we need to protect our schools and such. And I think the call, and many persons are calling for, on the school compounds, CCTV, that there is some actual monitoring, direct recording of the activities on the school. The sad truth is that we are reaching that point in our history that we might have to have this type of vigilance for the protection of our children.
So let me move beyond the whole issue of CCTVs and so on. Let me just look at the idea of guidance counselors. When I was in school, you had one guidance counselor, full stop, and that person did everything. And you spoke about resources. Is that one of the resources that we would need to get?
So I was when you ask me a question, I'm going to answer at a level as a clinician. We think on all levels, all tiers, And there's no one quick solution to this. That's a lot of times we tend to try to find, okay, what is the one answer? What is the one thing that is going to solve this problem? We have to have immediate, urgent, short-term strategies, immediate. You need to have medium-term strategies, and you need to have long-term strategies to deal with the crisis that we're seeing. We have not just guidance counselors, but what you call HFLE teachers, HFLE
Home and Family Life Education.
Education officers. And the Ministry of Health and Wellness, the mental health unit, is working in collaboration with the Ministry of Education to basically roll out a mental health literacy program that is enabling persons such as the guidance counselors and the HFLE teachers to become more aware of issues in the children themselves and see to the proper channeling of such. I am also helping to coordinate some mental health interventions in response to the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of mental wellness and promoting mental wellness amongst our children, because we realize that at the end of the day, we have to focus a lot on the prevention, and preparation is the best prevention, and the preventative aspects of it for our schools and for our children. But that is one level. This was not an issue within the school in terms of the school's mental health. What we have to now deal with is the fallout from this in the children, the trauma that they have to be dealing with, which is another side of the intervention. What is happening in the society that causes something like this to become a part of our reality? That is the great concern. How can we stir the change and the awareness amongst our people that the way that we are going about resolving whatever disagreements we have, because the first thing that came to my mind with this is either this person is a psychopath or is some sort of revenge thing, or somebody, why would an adult target an 8-year-old child, right? So clearly there's a backstory, and usually when there's a backstory, there is something that has conflict in it. We need to be teaching our people how to deal with disagreement. If you and I don't agree, that don't mean that we may have to take you out. I may have to cut you out. I may have to cuss you out. We seek to understand that, okay, you have a particular purpose that you are pursuing in your life, and I am the same thing, and we meet to try and figure something out. And if we don't agree, maybe there's we both need to listen to each other more and figure it out, right? So there is that element of within the culture, within us, how we deal with each other.
So the family now, there's, needless to say that there's a whole lot of trauma, especially in this particular household, and others like it that would have experienced such things. What kind of policies, well, not even policy, interventions we can put there to help them heal, and to heal in such a way that they don't seek, because...
You mean the actual family affected?
The actual family. My
dear, the level of hurt, I as a mother, I cannot imagine what her parents might be going through, and especially her mother, because I can relate to being a mother. The level of therapy that is needed here is I cannot discuss and give you in detail here. But needless to say, it has to be intense, it has to be multifactorial, it has to be long-term, because the effect of this is long-term. This is a lifetime, damage. There's no quote-unquote recovery from this. It is learning how to cope and how to adjust and move forward despite the hurt.
All right, let's go to our first break. We discuss this and more after we return. Welcome back to the conversation where I'm having a discussion with Government Senator and Clinical Psychiatrist Dr. Sapphire Longmore. Now, just before the break, we started looking at families and how we can help to create interventions, long-term interventions. I'm not sure if you had finished that point, so you could...
Well, Kwame, for me, a significant result of the breakdown of our families. Remember, our families are first place where we learn to socialize, where we learn how to communicate, how to resolve conflict, how to learn how to give love, how to get love, how to receive it. And if you don't have that, what you learn in your family is what you go outside and do. And so what we're seeing, I think, is a manifestation of some of the breakdown, not some, but a lot of the breakdown that we see in our family. Look at our court system. Look how many cases in our court system are stemmed around family and family discontent. People arguing about dead left and brother killing brother and, you know, that type of stuff. So the breakdowns in our family, what we're seeing is a manifestation of that. And so a significant solution is to try and fix our families. And that I can go into a bit more later on in terms of what possible solutions that could be. But within our families too, and within our society, I've written an article on it on the power of play, and play as a solution to violence.
You're talking about the acronym or
play,
actual
as in
play?
PLAY.
Okay.
We're working on developing a program for the schools too, and with the acronym Positively Loving All of You. But when you play, health is on 4 dimensions: physical, mental, social, and spiritual. So there are 4 dimensions to health when we consider health. When you play, you engage yourself physically, mentally, socially, and spiritually. Spiritual health is our sense of belonging to something bigger than us, belonging to having a unique purpose. And a lot of people may confuse that with mental health. Mental health is how you feel, your emotions, how you think, etc., how you interact with your environment. But when you play, you engage holistically. It is one of the most healthy things you do. And play is not just for children. Teenagers should be playing. Young adults should be playing. Parents should be playing. Grandparents should be playing. And this is now how you learn. When you play, you learn how to socialize. You learn how to resolve conflict. And I'm not just talking about going outside and boxing a ball and playing football and stuff. Play involves things like going on outings, hiking, just doing that type of engagement, reading, creative expressions, dancing. When you go to a party, it's play, you're playing. When the National Stadium gathered for the 65th anniversary, and we had that wonderful presentation that everybody felt so good about, the Jamaican spirit was lifted. It was good for the spiritual health of the country. But it was also like a national play event. When you're saying go outside and run and him used to win and Shelly and that's like a representation of Jamaicans playing at that level. And that passion is there. And so when you have persons who are having difficulty in communicating that something is wrong with them, that could be an avenue in which you can get them to open up. You can get them to resolve.
So I'm hearing a number of things. I'm hearing that we don't play enough. And also I'm sensing that we are not as passionate as we ought to be about a number of things. I think we're so caught up with the 9-to-5 daily grind to ensure that we get this done and get that done. How can we, from your perspective as a senator now, how can we legislate play and make it make sense?
Well, personally, I think that we could, and I proposed this in my State of the Nation last year, that just like how you have Mother's Day, Father's Day, you should have a family day, a day of the family. Start there. Or even once a month. Put it on the calendar. That is a designated time for family to spend together and provide incentives for this. Provide incentives for fathers to spend time with their children. Provide incentives for companies to ensure that their employees are playing or engaging in this modality of interaction with their children, with their spouses, with their family members. You provide the economic support for it or incentivize it. The diaspora that is so active in remittances and trying to help with community development in Jamaica could fund community play, could be involved with setting up organizations to enable play. Imagine if Jamaica was flooded, our ghetto areas and our garrisons and our areas that are socio-economically impoverished. Imagine if it was flooded with basketball courts, netball courts, swimming pools, lawn tennis. Imagine that, Jamaica. Imagine if you had community centers that you could go and do art. You go to art class, or you could go and learn how to do make some sort of pastry. Imagine that. That is the therapy that will heal, and that is long term. That is what I'm saying, that we cannot, when you have a crisis like what happened, as a clinician, you have to think immediate, you have to put on a bandage on it quick, and you have to cauterize it. That's why we had to pull for like the SOEs and so forth, because the situation was in a crisis. But whilst you're doing that, you also must see to the medium and long-term solutions, because you have the effect is permeating. But
that's bringing me now to the issue of resources, because you're talking about something that's supposed to be holistic, and no doubt it takes cash to care, and lots of it. So to the extent where the more you want to care, the more cash you might need to have.
But guess what? Imagine the cash to care for the trauma. Look at the bill that you have to pay for the surgical intervention to treat the gunshot wounds and the chop wounds and and that type of stuff. Look at what has to be happening now with respect to what needs to happen for the interventions. Remember, prevention is always better than cure now.
But how do we get mommy and daddy?
Cost effective.
How do we get mommy and daddy to see the importance of that thing that you're talking about, vis-a-vis trying to ensure that you have food later, you have food tomorrow, because some persons literally hand to mouth.
It doesn't cost a lot to spend time. We can get innovative with it. We can to play is you can sit down, and you and I could play something now without necessarily going out to buy something expensive. You could take a pen and a paper. You could bring back the books. The libraries are there. When last we hear about persons going to the library and taking out a book and reading again?
Well, we have social media, so we don't really
and
do that.
And therein lies one of the issues. You know, our conversation could go on for quite a while now. Because if you want me to start on the social media stuff and the impact, we need to teach our children that social media is a tool. The laptop and the cell phones are tools, just like how the refrigerator and the toaster is a tool in your house. These are tools for us to use to our betterment, and you put them away at times, and you pick up other things. And just like we have to parent a child through different aspects of their life, as a parent, you have to parent them a lot in the online space. You have to remain aware. You're aware of what the child is eating. You're aware of what clothes they're wearing. It's the same thing. You have to be aware of what is going on online.
But if truth be told, we ourselves might need to be helped in terms of navigating that space as well, because most of us, or many of us, aren't what you call digital natives. We are just persons who we so happen to have a smartphone and we happen to have all these things, but we use it for the consumption value. We don't necessarily pay attention to the effects that this might have.
So let me a lot of times when we're discussing issues in Jamaica, we compare ourselves to other societies. We compare ourselves especially to Singapore. And we compare ourselves sometimes to more developed countries. So why Jamaica can't do this and that? We are a post-colonial society. And I don't know if we have really processed what happened when our forefathers were removed from their home ground. When you're talking about other countries and other societies that are functioning at a certain level, they have a generational continuity of the way of life, of the way of this grandfather has taught this son how to build this business, how to create this dynamic that it continues, and that father will teach his children. We don't have that here. We are almost trying to catch up. So when the reason it triggered me is that we are not the beneficiary of the importance of the value systems. So we now will gravitate towards the cell phone and the laptop because we don't have the value system in us that, you know what, it is time for me to go and put my child to bed. Or it is time for me to go and sit down and have dinner with them. Or it is time for me to take up this board game that I used to play with my grandfather and play with it with my grandchildren. It is time for me, say, you know that tree that grandpa did plant underneath, that ackee tree. Let me go sit down and talk to my son underneath that ackee tree because it brings me comfort. And I will tell him the history of how that ackee tree reached us up. We don't have that. And these are the things that I value personally. These are the things that matter in terms of how we learn to give love and to get love. How we learn how to resolve conflict and recognize that the fact that somebody might not agree with me, that means that they may have a different perspective that I have to appreciate and take the time to do so.
What is love? It sounds outlandish, but it's a question that based on the fact that you've been looking at play and now you spoke about love, but what is love in this context?
Love is tolerance despite the differences and commitment to moving forward. And
you're saying that we can legislate or help from a legislative and a policy perspective to do that?
I think that I've never thought about legislating for love. I think we can legislate for care. And caring is a significant reflection of love, yes. And, you know, when I reflected on, again, in my State of the Nation, and I remember when I was preparing for it, something hit me in terms of the post-colonial effect that I mentioned. That when you look at human interaction, our emotions are basically between love and hate. Any emotion you can think about.
So it's a binary.
Is between love and hate, is somewhere on that spectrum. And when if you look at the granularity of it, when our forefathers were brought across the waters, what was inculcated in them, in us, is hate. We were taught that discipline was a form of hate. But when you think about it, discipline is actually a form of love, you know. Discipline is a form of love. But we are culturalized to almost believe that discipline is a form of control and a form of hate. But discipline is actually helping somebody recognize that they can be better and do better for themselves.
All right, so we are just before. I want to see what final words you would have to give to that particular family now and families like that one, in terms of on the road to recovery. Well, he said it was not recovery, to healing.
Get back to your dig deep into your spiritual sense. Get back to recognizing that this universe works in a way that you cannot understand. And I should add that, you know, there are avenues in terms of spiritual health and spiritual healing that I'm doing work in that is a possibility for helping to develop that. But I would advise that the persons learn first they have to recognize the level of hurt and don't deny it. Don't deny the stages of grief that they're going through. Everybody goes through some stages of grief when something like this happens. Seek help. A lot of persons are making themselves available. You might not feel like you need this type of help now, but make notation of it. Get contact numbers and so forth. And try as best you can in moving forward to live a life that would make the memory of Danielle one that is positive. Because in doing so, you're somehow channeling her spirit and her energy. And I pray that we find who did this, because they need to face their consequence.
Yes. So I just want to thank you very much, Dr. Sapphire Longmore, for having this discussion, and we hope to have further discussions on this. Stay tuned. We'll be back after the break with children's advocate, Diane Gordon Harrison. This is The Conversation. I am Kwame. Welcome back to The Conversation. I have with me Diane Gordon Harrison, children's advocate. And welcome firstly to The Conversation. And I want to find out generally, how do you cope? You're on the front lines day in, day out, and let's be honest, our children are up against a whole heap of odds. How do you cope getting your work done, firstly?
All right, so there are a number of coping strategies. So we speak about mental health, and it's a very real thing. And so I certainly make sure that my mental health is in check. So there are things that I do that are therapeutic for me, things that I do that I enjoy. And I also have wholesome relationships in terms of my own family, in terms of my friend groups, and in terms of just people who are supportive and positive. So that's the first bit. In terms of day-to-day coping, I also really recognize that I can only do one case at a time, not necessarily a day, because in a day you may have to do 10 cases. But the point is, when you are focused on that one case, as you are immersed in it, you give it your all, you take a breather, and then you go to the other one. I don't like to look at the thing as a whole, because then it becomes overwhelming. For me, it's about chipping away at the block, doing what you can do, because lives are being impacted in real time, situations are being impacted, and you want to ensure that you are able to deal with those well. And then once you've dealt with those, you put it away for the time being and you move to case number 2. So bite-sized pieces so you can maintain impact.
All right. Now, I see, well, we have Danielle Road just now. We have one person is responsible or being responsible for the death of 5 others in a similar fashion, and 4 of which are children. Are there existing child protection policies and regulation or legislation in Jamaica? Are they adequately addressing the issues that we have?
I think we're over-legislated, in fact. So we have legal frameworks. I can name several pieces of legislation that we have in place that create the framework. For example, we have the Child Care and Protection Act, which says that anyone who sees anything, hears anything, or even merely suspects that something is going awry is supposed to proactively raise the alarm so that an intervention can be made and so that we can prevent harm from coming to children. Are we having the full buy-in of members of the community? That is a point for debate. We have the Sexual Offences Act, which again creates a framework in which children can be protected. We have the Child Pornography Act, which again creates another framework. We have the Offences Against the Person Act, which prevent, so we have legislation, but legislation is as good as the paper it's on, unless we have systems and people who are willing to be a part of implementing what the legislation provides for.
How can we improve these systems, though?
I think we need to understand as a society that this problem is our problem. It's not just a problem that's going to be fixed by institutions, by law enforcement, by commissions of parliament, or by creating more laws. Because as I said, you can have the strongest law on paper, but unless people come forward with information, it's not going to be effective. So one of the ways I see as a great injection of solution is that we need to have people awaken that consciousness. Some years ago, I had a discussion with someone who is based in the US, and they said to me, you know why we have so many programs that just spring up out of nowhere? You have a very active citizenry because they own the problem. It's because when there's an issue, they decide who can help me create noise about this issue and then create a solution. So for example, that organization that they have in the States with moms who are against, kids who drive when they're drunk, that started because a mother lost her son who was coming from a party with others who were, driving. I think it's called MAD, Moms Against Drunk Drivers. And that started from a woman having a concern. So how can we, I think, sensitize our population that when you see something looking a little fishy in your community, don't wait until it's too late. When you see the older man who, for example, is perhaps visiting a 12-year-old repeatedly, or a 12-year-old going to an older man's house in the community, don't wait until she becomes pregnant at 15 and say, boy, it's a long time I'm going on with that, Or worse, as we have had in Jamaica, a child is impregnated and then strangled. And then you say, oh, yes, I used to see it, but boy, it's so things go. That's not how things go. So how do we empower our people to speak up before it's too late so that the entities that are there to create the interventions can do so in real time?
But this sounds like a cultural issue.
Yes.
So what I know say out no leave, it's not my concern, I leave it alone. No, so we have an issue in terms of effective implementation and enforcement. And then you say that we need to have more sensitization, but in the same way that we're over-legislated, couldn't we be over-sensitized to the case where we're desensitized?
No, because there's a way to do it that it's appropriate. So you don't want to show people the worst of the worst all the time, because that is what leads to normalizing horrific acts and having people become desensitized. But you want to have conversations at the community level to say to somebody, for example, when you're sending your child to school, especially if your child has to walk on the road, don't bother with this thing where you have a fancy backpack and the child's name is on the outside of the backpack. Because a child who may be walking to school may hear somebody say, Jack, what's going on? And instinctively, they're going to turn around because that's their name. So it's about giving people strategies that can help them, help their children protect themselves. Giving people information that, look, we're not going to tell you all the horrible things that have happened, but we're going to tell you things that are red flags, that if you see them, you say something quickly, so that the interventions can come. I think it's very important to keep that going, because some people don't know, or some people know but don't have the strategy to say, this is how I share the information with my child or with my community without alarming them or making them become desensitized.
So based on what you have said, though, you're not of the opinion that there should be any plans rather to introduce any form of new legislation, or how can we, seeing that we might not have that, how can we strengthen the existing laws to address emerging issues such as we have cyberbullying, that's one issue that's coming up again, online child exploitation or child trafficking, or how can we fix that?
All right, so we have legislation that covers child trafficking, the Trafficking in Persons Prevention, Suppression and Punishment Act. And in fact, that piece of legislation deals with human trafficking generally, but it says when you come on to child trafficking, the penalties are even more serious, because if you traffic a child, it's seen as an aggravating set of circumstances, which means it's categorized as worse than regular trafficking. So we have that already. We have, for example, I think, to look more at policy. So yes, we have legislation, but what are the policies that are going to guide institutions now to ensure that if you have a case of cyberbullying, you can deal with that effectively? If you see online sexual exploitation in the form of, for example, sexual grooming. How can you disrupt that in a real way, and how can you help to identify persons who may be preying on children, and then knowing what to do when you identify them? So I think we need to look more at what I call child safeguarding policies, which are not laws, but documents that literally give you a guide as to how to deal with disrupting inappropriate behavior in good time, and how to treat with ensuring that if you find out that there is that inappropriate behavior, the next steps to ensure that there is accountability for those who are preying on children.
All right. Are there any steps that you can tell us about, such as collaboration efforts between government agencies and NGOs and communities rather, that can be used to protect children and to prevent child abuse?
Yes. All right. So because of this continuing problem of what we generally call violence against children, which really covers everything: cyberbullying, sexual abuse, physical abuse, trafficking, murder, wounding, all of these things, we realize that there is an interconnectivity. So it has to be that we're having joined up conversations. So currently there is in fact an interministerial working group that deals with children or violence against children. And so that working group is kind of like the umbrella group that deals with the roundtable discussions, but very importantly, there is the involvement at the community level and with civil society and academics as to what are some of the strategies that can be employed at the community level. So instead of just talking in a ministry building, what's happening in community X that needs to be addressed, and how can different players from the church to people who have an active PTA, to a community-based organization, to a service club, how can you help to disrupt? And I'll give you a quick example. Some years ago, I participated in a forum that I think it was Kiwanis Club that was having somewhere in St. Anne. And I challenged them and I said, service clubs are well placed, have good intentions, and really do good work. But here are some of the top issues that are affecting children. We have unattached youth who are getting into gangs because they're available, and gangs need foot soldiers. We have girls sometimes who are misguided, who are not getting good information or supervision, and they become pregnant. And I want to challenge you to come up with a community-based initiative that can engage these unattached youth and these girls who are lacking supervision. And fast forward to, I think, last year, they said to me, we took up your challenge, and here it is. We want you to come. We want you to see the program, because we now have an after-school activity that engages these boys. So instead of being on the street corner, just there waiting, they're engaged in meaningful activities. They have a homework club. And after that, they have activities that can really engage them and channel their energies in a positive way. So it's really about seeing what facilities we have, how many do-gooders are out there. And, that's one of the things about Jamaica. We have a lot going wrong, but we still have more good than we have bad. We have people who understand when something needs to be nipped in the bud. We have people who understand what is the right way of doing things. And so it's really calling those persons out to say, look, you have good ideas, let's help you to action those ideas for the benefit of our children.
Well, when you made the statement a while ago about having more good than bad, I remember a statement by the Governor General,
yes,
where it says that there's nothing wrong with Jamaica that cannot be fixed by what's right with Jamaica.
Absolutely.
But outside of that, what else do you think that we can find, that we can put together to work together to promote a culture of reporting and preventing child abuse, and to support child victims in their recovery?
That's a multi-layered question, right? So the first part deals with, again, awakening that consciousness that I spoke about. Is it that we need to be having town hall meetings? Is it that we need to be having a reasoning on the corner as men are playing dominoes and talk about issues that they see, and help them to realize that, yeah, you're seeing that, but it's not really right. So next time you see it, this is what you need to do. Is it that we need to be having meetings at the clocks in town centers across Jamaica to hear what the issues are and then help to craft solutions? my view in relation to all of those is that yes, those are things that we need to be doing, and they're happening to an extent, but they need to be scaled up. That's one. In terms of a national dialogue as well, whether through billboards or ads or something in both traditional media and social media spaces, we need to be penetrating the positive images in a creative way, because nobody wants to be preached at. Nobody wants to hear somebody saying, oh, you should always do something, because people tune you out after a while. So it's about finding a creative way to get that culture shift message across that will inform a change in habits. So that's the part of the prevention and awakening.
All right, so we'll follow up with that after our final break. This is The Conversation. I'm speaking with Diane Gordon Harrison, children's advocate. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Conversation. Just before we went to the break, we were looking at, well, we're supposed to be looking at how we can help child victims' recovery. Could you speak a little bit more to that?
Absolutely, because that's so important. For me, that's really at the heart of what this whole conversation has to be about. So yes, it's important to hold people accountable, but if at the center of it, you have a child who is literally a ghost of him or herself, then it means we have a significant problem, because this child would have had very serious adverse childhood experiences that will now follow that child throughout life into adulthood unless there is proper victim care and support. And what does that look like? It involves counseling. It involves listening ear services, which means sometimes you don't have to say anything, but the child needs that space to be able to offload and share, because if not, it's going to be like, you know, when you have a bottle and it's under pressure and you keep piling things into it and nothing releases that pressure, eventually it may explode. And so if that child doesn't have that ability to vent and to off-pack and unload some of that pressure, it's going to literally cause a human being to erupt. And then that affects so many other life experiences. So we need to be ensuring that there are active linkages to the Victim Services Division. For example, the Ministry of Justice has a Victim Services Division that says whenever there is a crime that's committed against a child, even if the perpetrator isn't caught, that unit in the Ministry of Justice is there to give counseling support to the child, to help the child through, and in fact all victims, not just children, to help them through the criminal justice process. You also have Safe Spot, which is now operated by the Office of the Children's Advocate, which provides 24-hour support, 7 days per week, for children to get that immediate support, the way they do it, you know? So it provides support through WhatsApp, through direct messages on Instagram and Snapchat, and if they want to hear a voice as well, they can call, and there are counselors and psychologists available without any wait time that gives them that support. And this is continuous, because we recognize that unless there is that coalescing around fixing or helping to repair and reverse the harm, then we're really asking for more trouble.
All right, so you spoke about all the divisions that we have, and you spoke about a multifaceted approach. Now, I've always been told that it takes a village to raise a child. My question is, what's wrong with the village? That's the first question.
The village is under stress. The village is disjointed at times, and sometimes the village doesn't even recognize that they're in the village, right? So that see no evil, hear no evil phenomenon is a part of that dysfunction, where people will see something in the community but won't bother to say because it's not their child, or it's something that they don't want to get involved with, or they're just too busy, right? So that is the not recognizing that under our legislation, which we've been speaking about, it says that every single person who lives in Jamaica, you don't have to be a social worker or a guidance counselor or anything, but anyone who lives in Jamaica has a duty when they see something to raise an alarm. And the legislation goes so far as to say that if you fail in that duty as a fish vendor, bus conductor, taxi driver, and we have evidence to show that you failed, you can be charged for a criminal offense called failure to report, and that can land you in prison or jail for 6 months or facing a fine of $500,000. So the legislation is there, but the villagers sometimes don't realize that they're in the village. The other part of the problem, when I said the village is broken, is that we have people, for example, who became parents before they could properly parent, right? So we're talking about the teenage mother. We're talking about the father who wasn't really in a committed relationship or ready to have a child. So he knows he has a youth, but he's not in that child's life. And so when you have people, for example, who grow up with these kinds of social deficiencies, I call them, how can we expect them to function in a responsible way when they're struggling and juggling the reality of their day-to-day life? And so those are some of the issues that have impacted the village.
So based on all that you have said, though, is Jamaica a safe space for children?
That is such a powerful question. Because instinctively as a Jamaican, I want to say yes. But then as a practical person, seeing the issues that impact our children, we just have to be on our guard. And that's just the honest truth. We have to be vigilant when it comes on to creating that safety that our children deserve and that we crave for them. So it's about looking at who is in your immediate village. Who are the people that we expose our children to? Who looks after them when school is finished? Who is picking them up? Who is having conversations with them? Because all of these things will ultimately impact on the safety of your child and on the safety of that village that we're trying to create for individual children. But we have to be on guard. There's just so much going on, and our children continue to be under threat, some more than others, perhaps because of socioeconomic factors and other factors that make more children vulnerable than others.
Wow. So tell me about child poverty now and social inequalities to some extent. How does child poverty impact the overall well-being and future prospects of children in Jamaica?
Okay, so child poverty is usually a direct derivative or something that has direct relationship to the status of the parent, right? Or the guardian who has the ability to care for the child. And what we find is that if you are in dire straits every day for food, then there are some decisions that you may make that may not be the most appropriate or even the ones that you want to make. We have had discussions with persons who say, I'm trying to make ends meet, but I just don't have the money to send my child to school 5 days per week. Or I just don't have the luxury of giving them that nutritious meal that I know they need, And if you look at all of the different markers, we know, for example, that children who have proper nutrition are, less predisposed to lifestyle diseases, to malnutrition. And if you are less predisposed, it means that you have a better shot at learning, of understanding your lessons when they're given, because you're not hungry, so you're ready to learn. We know that children who have greater contact hours in terms of teaching and learning in a school environment are perhaps going to do better than someone who's going to school 2 times a week. We know as well that even those children who are able to go to school 5 days a week but have a learning issue and they would need extra lessons and so on, but the parents can't afford it, then that support is not going to be there to right-end them up, so to speak, so they have a fair shot. So in short, socioeconomic issues that have children being at the lower end of the poverty spectrum are going to impact them negatively unless we can have external support that can assist the parents and them to really improve their circumstances.
All right, so are there any other underlying contributing factors to this, though, to the whole idea of child poverty and social inequalities?
I think it's very heavily linked to, the family you're born into. It's linked to the choices that your family perhaps would make. So when you look at, for example, persons who live in a particular community. Some children will say, well, I can't focus, I need to sleep now because there were gunshots all night last night, you know, and then that kind of discussion, I think, opens up the dialogue to what are some of the support services in those communities. You know, what can be done in terms of, and I'm speaking now of systems to disrupt the cycle of violence in those communities. What can be done to improve the access to social services so that people can feel as if they're living in a space where they can get a break to, you know, focus on humanity and not have to be thinking about survival, you know. All of those things, I think, make a difference and impact on just the outcomes of children in these various circumstances.
So I'm hearing a number of things, and I want us to know, go back, because when you look at the community, for example, we generally ask, what could we have done or what could we do better? And I'm trying to put that in the context of the young baby, the 8-year-old that we lost the other day now. And my thing is, could these things, I understand that poverty would not or might not have been a contributing factor now, but in terms of inequalities, social inequalities, and not enough resources on the side of the family or so, could those have contributed to what's happening or what has happened?
Well, without speaking about Daniel's case specifically, because I mean, my office is involved with that, but I see where you're going. To an extent, because if you have someone who is picking up their child in a car and dropping them to and from school, it means that the exposure that a child, for example, who has to walk to school has is automatically eliminated from the child who is being picked up. If you are talking about a situation where you don't have a steady arrangement in terms of who collects the child, for instance, and the child is accustomed to going with somebody who they're probably familiar with, but there's no firm arrangement, it increases the possibility of the child going with someone, yes, who they are familiar with, but someone who actually wasn't authorized and who doesn't mean them well, you know? So all of these factors, I think, contribute to uncertainty and can increase the risk of potential harm. It doesn't mean that it will happen, but just in terms of, you know, just looking at it theoretically, those things would increase or decrease depending on the perspective you're coming from, the risk of harm.
So what can your office do to help to minimize that risk, and what can the schools do to also help to minimize those risks? Right,
so that conversation is an ongoing one, and it comes back, unfortunately, to resources. There are some schools, for example, who have people resources, manpower, and one school is dismissed, for example, you always have a teacher who is assigned on duty at the pickup area, right? There's no child who leaves without a teacher seeing who has come. So that goes down to whether we can get a network of persons where it is that, you know, you can't afford it to hire security guards. I've heard, for example, somebody saying, oh, you know, all schools need to have security guards right around the clock. That goes down to money. How affordable is that? Is it that, as I said on another program, we need to be looking at getting that whole corporate social responsibility alive and well, and saying to security companies, the country is in crisis, can you help us by giving us some concessionary rates for schools? Or do we do a roster system? So we have security guards just coming on for 2 hours when school gives, you know, has the dismissal, so that we have that person looking. Or if it's a small community school, can we have parents who aren't working be a part of that network? So they are rostered, you know, and they come, school is supposed to be dismissed 2 o'clock, they're there from 1:45, and they stay until 4 o'clock, just to ensure somebody's there eyeballing. So some safeguarding system that can be practical given the circumstances of the school, because as I said, it takes cash to care.
All right, so from your office now, are there any support? What kind of support can you give to that family now, and families like Daniel Rose's family?
Right, so usually once we have this kind of tragedy, one of the first questions is, are there other children in the family, that need the support to cope, or other kinds of support that they may need? Also in relation to the expenses that are going to be a real thing now for this mother and father to think about with, Daniel's passing. What do those look like, and how can we assist? And really just to help the family cope as best as they can. That's in terms of on the human side of things. And then outside of that, we have an investigations office or team within the Office of the Children's Advocate. And so they have been asking the relevant questions and my instruction at the school to understand exactly what systems exist and how we can ensure that we don't have another Daniel Rowe, not only at that school, but at schools across the board. So we feed our evidence into recommendations in a bid to help prevent tragedies like this.
Thank you very much, Diane and Gordon Harrison, for having this discussion. We hope to have more like it in the future.
Yes,
This has been The Conversation, and we hope to see you soon. I'm Kwame. Have a good one.